Oggi si fa fatica oggettivamente a vedere gli erbari che vanno in dormienza dovuti dall'abbassamento della temperatura.
Il sistema delle opere di bonifica ha retto in maniera più che buona visto l'interno, però è chiaro che ha mostrato anche carenze che evidentemente dovranno essere affrontate.
Quindi si è investito in strutture anche diciamo, coperte, strutture che garantiscono un certo comfort. Oggi a distanza di 20-30 anni bisogna arrivare un po' il tutto.
Fioriture o comunque delle levature anticipate rispetto a quella che è il normale decorso, che basta, perché alle volte poi succede, o anche una notte di gelata che compromette completamente il tutto il raccolto. Drammatiche perché tutto è stato impostato a livello così produttivo, culturale, direi anche quasi sociale a quello che era il clima forse di una volta.
Ho paura che continua ad accorciarsi dalle stagioni.
È di mais, avremo degli attacchi, dovremmo prepararci ad avere degli attacchi di insetti.
Ma se in caso che può succedere qualche pioggia di troppo, ma...
Ciò fa problemi di malattia perché c'era un caldo umido e poi i ritardi della produzione incredibili perché sempre è in produzione molto più tardi.
Okay, I hope you had a very nice lunch. I saw people talking in front of the posters in a very engaged way, and that's just the way I envisaged it. We're now coming to the presentation of case studies in Macsur. The case studies are supposed to exemplify how the models can work together, and we have two kinds of presentations now. Rather very short ones, point ones, and then a little longer ones for the showcase regional pilot studies. And the first presentation will be by Heikki. Will you come? Or whatever, right? And then we changed the schedule. Sorry. I can't even read my own notes now. Eric will be the first one, and he will present the ClinSafe interactive platform. I'll give you a note.
Right.
You want to use that?
What are the choices then? Just shout.
Yeah. Why use the other one?
What's the other one?
Yeah, no, the other mic.
Okay. Might be easy to just talk.
Yeah.
Perhaps if I talk down here. Okay. All right. One then, we will. Okay. ClinSafe is an integrated assessment. I've put up here all the models that are within the ClinSafe project. And the one that sort of was interesting, my model was, which is the rural land allocation in the middle at the bottom. But that feeds on a lot of models, urban, flooding, crop yields, forestry, and water availability for irrigation and so on. It's a web-based system, so it builds on a previous project we had, which in the traditional way of these climate change assessments, ran for 4 climates and 4 scenarios, produced a report with a few tables in, and you had no idea what affected what, and you couldn't run another one because that would take another couple of days. So the web-based system is meant to run very quickly and simulate any combination of any parameters you get in there. So you look at the impacts, and then from that you get the vulnerabilities, and you can then assess adaptations. So this is the ClinSafe computer screen. If you go on to www.clinsafe.eu, you get into this, you can run it. This is a particular run. You'll see at the top, sorry, go back. You'll see at the top 3 emission scenarios from our model, and there's theoretically you lots of alternative climates, there's 5 climate models in there. And the We on the World gives you a socio-economic scenario, which is actually a settings of all the, you can see 5 sliders there, or there's all the towns, we also have more sliders up, and all those, you can always change those and find your own scenario, or see what happens if you play around with population change and so on. The model works on the soils within 10-minute grid. So there could be 30 or 40 soils within one 10-minute grid, and then that's added up to give you the percentage of the grid which is intensively farmed, urban, forest, or whatever. Okay. But moving on now to Macsur, we did Europe. So within Europe, we've done all the 10 grids. So if you want to look at the regional pilot study solution, you can look at the 10 grids within, for example, AT12, and that's 2. One of the things I was going to say, I can't move my hands out of this. When you look at the solution on the website, you get 3 types of behaviour. The intensively farmed patch, so it's like this, it can be like this. One thing that can happen in the future is that the north can move up. The other thing that can happen is the whole thing can move up. And the other thing that can happen is it just goes, squeezes up in Europe. And that's a function of the population and the yield change and the climate scenario, more or less. There are lots of other sliders, but at the end of the day, population and the yield change with breeding are the main drivers of scenarios. So, this is the European solution, which starts first. So, all the regional climate change, we have 3 scenarios, current SSP2 and SSP3, and 3 climates, current IPC and Agro, 3 by 3 solution. And you can see that European-wise, there are changes in agricultural land use. This also affects the prices of the crops and the amount of land you need to produce the food that the population in Europe needs. Okay? So when you move to places like Austria, you can see that if you don't change the climate, just change the scenario, the amount of land that becomes abandoned from the model is 117,000 hectares. Now, you also get then, when you go on to the socio-economic climate scenarios, you can see how in SSP2 there's not that much change, but once you get to hand change, there's quite a large change. So the climate has quite a big effect there. As I say, it depends really on those. This is Sardinia. And you can see again, you see the same effect of SSP2, in effect even without the climate scenario. But what happens down in SSP3 and IPCM, you can see how the land use has just disappeared, 908 abandoned, as it were. And that is basically this shrinking, as I said, because the centre of Europe can produce and the north can produce enough food, and you don't need Sardinia anymore. I put this up as a response to one of the earlier talks. One of the things you get out of the model is the yield, and you can see how, if you look at SSP3 at the bottom there, the yield is different. Even though it's the same climate, the yield is different. And that's because the land you use, if there's less land growing wheat, then the better land is growing wheat, so the yield for this nut stew is higher, and the more land you use, the lower the yield, average yield for the nut stew. Okay. We also get Finland. I'll be time to go through in detail. Similar effects, but obviously in Finland, when you get the extreme scenarios and the intensive population required, you get a large increase in the amount of agriculture in Finland. Okay. You can plot them all out like this. That's current, and you can all get that current. And you can look at the effect of it in Austria and Italy and Scotland. Okay. Okay, so ClueSafe is finished, and we've now moved on to the Impressions project, which in many ways is fairly similar. has all the same talk about stakeholders and so on that everybody has, but it's focused on high-end scenarios and transient land change. So how land will change over time, because those are based on the 2050 time. So these are based on how will it change towards 2050. And okay, finally, is that my 5 minutes gone? More, a lot more than me. Yeah, so we have a crop model, a life crop model, a forest model, all feeding agricultural land use model. And so we've got inputs to crop end, live end, and training. Thank you.
Thank you. I think I didn't explain that we gave them only 5 minutes time to make this presentation so we can fit all of the exciting results and make sure into these 3 days. So next is Peter Zander.
So I'm reporting from a project which is executed in northern Germany, financed by the EMDF, the German Ministry for Research. I already have presented this in München, so I will be short on some things and try to concentrate on some new developments. Unfortunately, we are not as far as I thought we would have been now, so we have now not yet final results. Objectives of the project are to analyze climate change mitigation and adaptation strategies for agricultural and forestry land use in northern Germany. We have 4 case study regions distributed from west to eastern Germany, and try to analyze adaptation needs and options of new cropping practices. We are going to do a number of scenarios based on country baseline and on climate change, RCP and 5. We are running a farm model for each of these regions, which is applied to IX-based farm typology, and finally 64 farm types will be run in 4 regions, in these 4 regions. This approach is embedded into a number of other projects from which we finally get price vector to cover future market developments. This comes from Capri Roundness, as using roundness allows us to compare the total resource we have for certain regions, which are districts, not three-level districts in Germany, finally with Capri results. So our results are given through to different models looking at groundwater issues. So as I already said, the NEAR program model is set up for 62 or 65 typical farms based on that typology. We use production practices from experts and farmers surveys, which are not yet combined with results from crop growth models, which we would like to do. And we look at, we try to add irrigation practices to the data we got from the experts. And modeling results will show shifts in crop shares, changes in management options, and so on. So I already mentioned irrigation. In one of the western regions, we have a long tradition of irrigation. Almost 90% of the area is irrigated on very sandy soils. In the eastern part of our study region, we had in the former GDR also a tradition of large-scale irrigation, which was completely abandoned after the Fourth War, and now farmers start again to think about irrigation. So we expect that with climate change and an increase in mean temperatures earlier start of the vegetation period, which could have also a positive effect on water deficits. We have an fertilization effect of rising CO2 concentrations. All this should be covered by crop models and to deliver yields with and without irrigation for now and for 2030. So at the same time, we had in the last years an increase in product prices, which led us to the conclusion that irrigation is a promising adaptation strategy, even for cereals. So to develop my tacit knowledge for this modeling approach, we looked at data from irrigation experiments in Lower Saxony on sandy soils, where they found 2.8 ton yield increase through irrigation, and the gross margin of this irrigation practice is here set calculated with different prices. So here we are at price level of 2005, more or less, and here we are at the current price level, and we see that irrigation becomes interesting nowadays. Yeah. So if we assume different soils with different potential for yield increase for wheat, we see here the level of our irrigation trial, and we see that for prices between 180 to 120 tons per hectare, a very positive response, but for prices of 2005, we would have been negative gross margin for this for irrigation. So it depends a bit on farmers' expectations for the future, in how far they get interested to invest in irrigation. So if there is an indication that price levels stay as they are now, we should assume, without having modeled this yet, that in the long run we will see irrigation in most of the sandy soils in Brandenburg. Farmers we have interviewed can be distinguished now in two types. One who already invest in irrigation, and the others who would like to invest but have not the necessary capital for different reasons. And for the modeling approach, we have to say that data on yields with and without irrigations would be nice to have out of crop models. And of course, water availability in different conditions has to be best, and things to have a lot of this project.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We now come to the regional pilot studies, our showcase studies that are most advanced in integration, and I invite Niki Lehtonen to come and present the Finnish case study.
Thank you. Yes, I'm going to give an overview about specific problems and solutions in climate change adaptation in North-South region. Specific topics in this talk will be given more explicit presentations during this conference, so I will give you mostly flavor about what we are doing. What are the problems and solutions? Yes, we are now considering this area of north-south, south in Finland, which is quite important agricultural region. 10% of dairy cows are kept in this region of the whole continent. And because this is more or less one of the most important agricultural regions in Finland, the income level per capita is lower than the average. Everybody who is in agriculture is generally earning less than the average. So we have this agriculture as some sort of big in Europe, it consumes taxpayers' money, and northern Savo is no exception. But let's move on. The land use is dominated very much by livestock production, mostly dairy. And dairy is coupled to grasslands. Grasslands are coupled somewhat to cereals, because grasslands are managed grasslands, not just permanent grasslands are very few, so that we can see that there is spring barley and oats, which are used as a renewable means of grassland. So you seed, give a barley seed as a shelter for grassland, and then you first harvest the barley, and then we can harvest the grasslands, cultivated grasslands 2-3 years after that. So that there are some pigs, some poultry, but that is really of small importance. So there are little bit oilseed, little bit wheat, and actually wheat yield is slightly higher than barley yield, but it requires relatively good soils, and it's mainly done in individual farms. We can see the land use of dairy farms here. So here we can see that wheat in the very low part is almost non-existent, rye is non-existent, but barley, yes, there is 15% barley and some oats, and most of land is under grassland silage, pasture grass, and little bit under nature management fields and other set aside. So this is basically a farm type which puts lands under intensive cultivation. So this is increasing in total of land share, because northern Savo is one of the few regions where dairy production is likely increasing in this region, not that much as we see in the land use, but in most regions in Finland provinces, dairy is going down slightly. But in 4 or 5 provinces, dairy is going slightly up, or at least staying the same. So that this region is even more dominated by dairy than before. And here we have cereals farms. There are quite many cereals farms in this region, 4,000 farms in total, 1,200 dairy farms, and about 1,000 cereals farms, which are not producing only cereals, but they produce dry hay and some pasture grass for surrounding livestock farms. So they are certain type of mixed cereals farms and producing depending on the demand, but most common is to have a barley and oats about 50% of the land area, and then somewhat more extensive crops there as well. Here we see the economic size of these farms in this region. So the big farms are mainly dairy farms, cattle farms, beef growers, and maybe some in the horticulture, outdoor production. So there are some very production in this area as well. Here we see the structural development of dairy sector. So this is simulated using Central sector model, which has been calibrated to existing structural statistics. And in 1995, 80% of the cows were kept on farms with less than 20 cows. But Gradually, during the EU membership and investment subsidies, structural aids for such improving fund structure, first middle-sized funds growth rapidly, but soon, a little bit later, big, large dairy farms started growing, and now we have a situation where cows seem to be shifting to a larger farms. So the farms are expanding from middle-sized farms to large farms. So that we have already simulated 5 years ago that at year 2020, 65% of cows from this region are in the size category of 50 cows. Yes, so this is a very strong structural change in this region just to survive the day. So this is the most important structural issue in this region, to survive the dairy. But it becomes more challenging in the future, mainly partly because of climate, but mainly maybe because of agricultural market changes or some other changes. But climate change is one of the drivers there as well. So most increase in temperature is expected during winter, not in growing period, and also most of the precipitation is expected to be increased in winter, not in growing period, and it implies that there is some, at least a small trend of worsening early summer fall. So this is in the whole Finland. It is true in some extent also in northern southern region, but maybe not that much as in some other regions in Finland. But mainly farmers in these regions are afraid of reduced snow cover and permafrost and maybe some winter damages for grassland. Here it has been calculated already what happens to selected agroclimatic indicators in different time points in Finland. And here is B1, climate scenario here is A2, which is quite strong warming. And if we think about mainly this strong warming, we can see that there are some positive indicator changes in terms of productivity. So such changes should imply some higher productivity, but there are very significant challenges as well, like too little rain in the early part of growing season, maybe more dry days, which makes the situation a little bit more worrying. And in terms of grasslands, we have relied very much on bird of Macsur and others from Norway, so that we have already, Kuopio North-Savo region has been simulated in terms of grasslands, and the growing period will slightly shift earlier, but maybe the growing season is extending further to autumn than to earlier. And maybe the worrying thing is the snow cover days will decrease quite considerably. And here's one example of a grass field after summer drought. So this was really the case that this was the time of the year when grass harvest should take place, and the field looks like this. And here is the even more worrying case. Ice encasement because of wet, warm winters. And still it will be possible in the distant future, still after 50 years it is possible that all snow is melting on the fields, and then there will be -20 centigrades for 2 or 3 weeks. So that kind of situation took place also last winter, not only 2009. So this spring is very interesting for farmers in the region, that what is growing in the field, or is anything growing in the field. Even after a good winter, with plenty of snow, good snow cover, the situation may be surprising in spring, especially if there are perennial grass types. Timothy is more winter hardy, but some other grass types may suffer severe damages. Okay, if we think about adaptation, we can have earlier cuts in the future. We can have 3 cuts per year. Currently, 2 cuts is more common than 3 cuts. We can have a more resistant cultivars to heat, stress, and drought. We can have cultivars with better nutritive value. Maybe still sufficient winter hardiness in the future, if not yet, maybe later. And the farmers have to probably have to be careful with fertilization level, when to give and how much. And we are also worried about soil compaction. We have had some wet summers, and farmers have seen soil compaction already because of big farm size and heaviness. Yes, and let us look a little bit on this yield variation, which is a core issue in dairy farm and meat farm management. So we have calculated the so-called drought risk or yield risk in the future. How does it change compared to the past? And this data is from Macsur linked. It's an ensemble model runs from 50 different climate scenario models. Yes, and there are certain means how farmers can shelter against shortage of silage, and this means that they have just extra area or just more storing capacity. And here is the one outcome of Pellervo, one only in our institute. Pellervo will give you another presentation on this topic tomorrow. But luckily in North-Southern region, it seems that the real years of clear grass silage deficit, they will not become more frequent, but less frequent on North-Southern region. It is not exactly sure what happens to the quality of silage, but at least harvest will go up by almost, the dry matter harvest will go up by 30%. It's not that bright in Jokioinen in southwest and in Russia in St. Petersburg region. Yeah. In cereals production, we will have some other adaptations. First, farmers can become more flexible because of longer growing season. So the maintenance costs are not that severe anymore, but maybe we can have new cultivars which are a little bit more adapted to longer growing season. And pesticides can be increased in Finland because, for example, fungicides are used very, very little, at least in Pohjois-Savo. Maybe they are weed control chemicals which are used, and these crop protection challenges, higher pest pressure, disease pressure, that is coupled with crop rotation issue. And we can even have in the future more proteins there. If the prices are high, we could have such option, but at low prices it is not sensible. Yes, and we can have different fertilization practices there, more careful fertilization, and farmers say that really soil investments are needed, but the markets and policies have not been very encouraging up to now. And here is our yield gap figure, and clearly we believe that we can explain using economic analysis a big part of the yield gap. This work is also presented during this conference in more detail, but we have included this liming and nitrogen fertilization, crop rotation, and fungicide use, all in one single dynamic optimization model. it's still possible. It's easy to make a dynamic optimization model. Almost anybody can do it in technical sense. But the challenge here is the parameterization. More about the parameterization in a separate presentation. But we have run the model for high disease pressure and low disease pressure scenarios on three different price levels. And we have obtained very consistent reactions in the model. What happens to fungicide use? Fungicide use is profitable at high prices, and also soil pH value is high in high price scenarios, and it seems really that high prices are necessary to increase productivity. If market share policies are discouraging also in the future, there will be no yield increase, but maybe yield reduction, despite of longer growing season or better cultivars. But we aim to sector level analysis as well. So we have to tune the sector level model with the options, change synergies between crops in different crop rotations, and different other crop management options must be specified also in sector model to tell what happens not only at the farm level, but in competitive markets after also other regions introduce such measures, adaptation measures. Yes, and we have already found out some preliminary outcomes generalization, because input prices, value of inputs is currently 1.5 times higher than the value of agricultural output. So this agriculture is a national economic hobby in most of Europe. So this is the situation in many countries in Europe, and that's why we have the subsidies. So the input prices are very crucial. If they still become more expensive, farmers lose their motivation. So it's important to have a coupling between input and output prices in different SSP scenarios. And also we have found that, okay, yes, in some SSP scenarios, food diets change away from livestock products, and that may be challenging for Nordic agriculture. But also policies should be more adaptation oriented. We have some massive restrictive policies which make farmers not so adaptive. So there are many places we can still correct situation and make farmers more adaptive and more ambitious. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Heikki. What if you've got any questions here? Fine.
Thanks for the nice presentation. One question regarding the adaptation options that you have shown for the different farming systems. You have 2 slides on these. The options that you presented, are they a result of your simulation exercise, or has there also been some stakeholder interaction which you have used to sort of further qualify them and perhaps complement them?
Okay, if no more questions, I can answer this one very briefly. Yes, liming is necessary in Finland because of acid rocks and these soil types which are prone to acid soils. This has been relevant for many decades already. There is data material on the liming response, and liming has been more or less a little bit neglected in late because of EU membership and low prices. So that this has been brought up regularly by farm stakeholders. And also this crop protection issue is becoming increasing worry for farmers and also for cereals industry because they want to have better quality. So that I would say that the parameterization of these models, they require ongoing long-term research and continuation on the selected topics which have been observed as very crucial for farmers and stakeholders also earlier. But we are in contact with stakeholders. For example, this soil compaction issue is now a big important issue, which we don't have that good data, and that we need to think about what data can be obtained and utilized, and what are experiences in other countries.
One question concerning the last slide. You mentioned that the input costs are higher than the output revenues, and I'm wondering whether this is just variable inputs, or did you talk about labor costs and capital costs as well?
Yeah, it was meaning all inputs. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. Next presentation about our Austrian case study will be presented by Macsur.
So, good afternoon. I would like to present the second regional pilot case study for Central Europe, which is a small, or let's say two small landscapes in an Austrian region. I will talk about the Mostviertel. It's a Macsur region, and we selected two landscapes for this case study. This work is done together with colleagues and is based on an ongoing project as well. So it's Erwin Schmidt, Thomas Scharplein, and as you can see on this slide, and I guess everybody knows, Austria is in the center of Europe, and our case study more or less in the center of Austria again. In two landscapes which have about 1,500 hectares each, and we are modeling these two landscapes 231 parts. So the interesting thing of these two landscapes still didn't manage the distance between the microphone. I guess probably it works that way. The interesting thing on these two landscapes is that although they are pretty close to each other, the northern region, the southern region, just some kilometers apart from each other, they are quite different with respect to natural production conditions, like topography or the soil conditions. And as we will see later, also the climate conditions. This makes it a quite interesting case. It cannot be considered as typical for Austrian production circumstances because Austria has about 8 different main production regions, which are quite diverse, from arable farms to extreme mountain farming, mainly based on dairy cattle. But this kind of case study is a highly productive one. We will see later why. On these two pictures, you can see another phenomenon as well, which is, let's try this one. Perhaps it was the microphone and not mine. The northern landscape is quite intensively used. You can see it on the picture above. So it's an arable landscape with crops. This arable land are partly used for swine fattening, for example. And what we observed here in the last decades is land use intensification, loss of landscape elements. We have some kilometers away the southern landscape type, which is already hilly and mountainous in some parts of it, with some land abandonment, which is the problem at the other side of this scale, intensification, extensification. Okay. What is specific to this certain landscape, and those who understand German, you already noticed from the term Mostviertel, specific to this region are it's a landscape, and there the trees grown in the kind of agroforestry in this landscape. So trees in former days have been used for cider production and got lost more and more, and this was the reason for choosing these landscapes some years ago also to do analysis on issues of landscape development. under agricultural intensification. So in this time, you can imagine, and this has happened several times in many places in this region in the past, that trees have been cut down. In this specific region, I want to go back.
Yeah.
Yeah. No? Yes? No? Oh. Okay. It's the other way around. So we lost in these landscapes about 70% of the species. You can imagine probably if you are involved to agricultural or landscape ecology has quite heavy impacts on biodiversity. Again, on these two pictures, you can probably get an impression on the land use structure, which is also very important to our land use model. We will see later that it is on a scale which takes into account single feeds. The northern landscape, which is dominated by cropland, we see on average larger field sizes, area dominated with a lower degree of landscape elements. On the southern landscape, which is more grassland based, you have a higher degree of landscape elements, mainly oak. With respect to land use and livestock production, we have an average farm size of about 23 hectares, which is slightly above the Austrian average of 19 hectares, so in the European context, very small. In the Austrian context, it's more favorable production conditions. This is especially true for the livestock endowments. We have average cow sizes, herd sizes of 38 cows, which is far above, for example, the dairy cow average, which is about 11 cows per farm, dominated, of course, by a lot of small farms in the mountainous regions. Similar is true for swine fattening, pork production, which is on average 203 porks per farm. The Austrian average is around 70, so here you can see also, especially for the northern landscape, the more intensive one, there are large scale for producing farms. And this maybe gives you an impression that you have a quite interesting and diverse farm structure in both regions. With respect to cropland use, this is reflected, of course, on the livestock activities. We have a large proportion of corn production and barley production for feeding, some wheat and temporary grassland, again for dairy cows. These values, especially corn, are far above the Austrian average with corn production. What is interesting and what we observed in the last years is an extension of corn production in this region, which is also to some degree result of increasing biogas production. And what has been observed is that due to this extended corn production, there are more erosion events. This was one of the results within discussions with regional stakeholders. Okay, to give you an impression on the regional climate systems, again, we have a quite diverse situation between both landscapes. This map is based on a project done by Franziska Strauss et al., and we use her work for several integrated assessment studies to define climate zones in Austria. So on this map, what you can see is clustering of climate zones based on two values, that is precipitation and temperature. The more red, the lower the precipitation, and the more blue, the wetter the regions are. And what is interesting perhaps to know that Austria is very diverse with respect to precipitation. So we have some regions with above 2,000 millimeters per year, and other regions which are below 500 millimeters. And sometimes they are only separated by, let's say, 70 to 100 kilometers. So the east of Austria is very dry, and our region, it's the red circle is separated in a part with precipitation above 1,000 and another one with below 1,000 to 700 millimeters each. In both cases, precipitation obviously is not limited, is not limiting production a lot, which is shown soon. With respect to the temperature, you see here average temperatures, which are currently about 9 degrees Celsius. It now leads us to the climate change scenarios we are using in our case study region. That is, we are applying a statistical climate change model, which bases its projections on climate observations from the past. There is a great advantage. We get quite robust outputs which are needed for further biophysical process modeling. The disadvantage of this climate change model is that it is robust only for, let's say, about 30 years. So you can forecast as many years as you have robust observations from the past. It's limited to 30 years. What we, or Franziska Strauss in her work, discovered was that there is a robust temperature trend for Austria, which is about 2 degrees, and this fits quite nicely to a lot of other modeling studies and regional downscaling efforts. We assume about 2 degrees warming until 2050 and between 3 and 5 degrees warming until 2100 in Austria. This model results up to 2050 or 2040 50. Another issue is precipitation. There is a huge amount of uncertainty related to precipitation. The climate models we have access to show very different results. Frequently, for some regions, there are even changes in sign between decreases or increases in precipitation, and climate modelers often say we cannot really figure out so far if and what changes are. There are some who say that or assume that there will be shifts from summer to more winter precipitation by keeping the annual precipitations at the current levels, but this is quite unclear. And the result or our reaction was to define precipitation scenarios instead. So we said, based on a bootstrapping method, we assume precipitation plus or minus 20% from observations from the past to figure out how land-use reactions may be. And this may help us to gain some time until climate model plus can provide more robust precipitation results. Okay, that's about the current and the expected future climate changes. Based on previous stakeholder events and studies, we try to figure out how stakeholders in the region perceive climate change or observed it already in the past. And these are some of the results from it. So they observed, and as we also saw from the data, increases in mean annual temperature and as a reaction of these prolonged growing seasons, but also some more heavy precipitation events in summer, of course. What is interesting in this list probably is that although stakeholders assume prolonged growing seasons or observed it already in the past, they are quite pessimistic about growing conditions in the future. So they assume decreasing crop yields from more drought in summer, for example, or some higher temperatures. And this is also somehow contradictory to empirical results in model studies which show that at least until 2050 there may be yield increases in some parts of Austria and this region maybe not. On average, of course, and assuming only a certain degree of extreme events. And this is also where we start from to see whether climate change for this certain time period on average turns out to be as negative as stakeholders assume. I think it's important to be engaged with stakeholders at this stage and also to see how they perceive climate change, because those are the ones who have to react on this climate change, and if they are too pessimistic and probably wrong assumptions on these future changes, they may also choose their adaptation strategies into the wrong direction. Well, In the second part of the presentation, I would like to give you ideas on the research questions we are looking on and the model we have established. Okay, 2 minutes. That's easy. It's an easy task because it's quite a simple model. Okay, the research questions are, those are of course related to the case studies as well and to the history of this case study. They are that we would like to focus on climate change on the one side, but also on the effects climate has on land use management, biodiversity, and landscapes. And as a second option, this model has, from the history, also been developed to analyze agricultural policies. So there is a strong effort on modeling agri-environmental growth. With respect to Macsur, we are focusing on rural development and the issue of food production, which has to be addressed by design of communication. Just one word on the methods and data. In the center of the model, of the integrated modeling framework, is a bioeconomic farm model. It's farm-based, and the name already mentions it. It works on a field level scale, so single farms are modeled, and among these farms, even single fields. And this allows us to take into account, for example, field size or distance to farm, with the disadvantage that connections among farms are quite difficult to model because of this heavy computing. We use EPIC as crop model input to farmer space, and crop plotter, which is a crop rotation optimization model, to derive more realistic management measures. There is one way where Macsur inputs come into place. That is the Capri model, which can replace our assumptions on socioeconomic price development so far. As you know, farmer space, a farm model uses exogenous price forecasts, and those can be developed but have not been integrated so far by Capri. Okay, I will skip these slides. Just to show you how results will look like. These are preliminary results for certain selection of climate change and policy scenarios. And what we can see here are single farms in these box plots. It turns out that farms are impacted quite differently depending on which region they are, depending on which kind of fields they have. It shows that although the regions are close to each other, the kind of soil below and the thickness of the fields determines a lot of production costs and yield. This is another slide to show that what this high detail landscape modeling is for. So we can analyze landscape heterogeneity, which is important for effects on biodiversity, for example. It's a preliminary model. There are, of course, besides advantages, several disadvantages. One of it, for example, is that we can only cover 2 case study landscapes so far, so there is the question of upscaling our results, which is quite tricky, and the high data and computational demand. So thanks for your attention.
I'm opening the floor for questions. We've had now a presentation from Northern Europe, from Finland, and from Austria. At what level do you see similarities? It's obvious that Northern Finland is not similar to Austria. At what level do you see similarities in questions or climate impact?
I think that Austria is somehow divided with respect to climate change impact. So we have some parts of Austria which may favor more, others which may lose from climate change. Our specific case studies are in a part where precipitation currently is sufficient, which means that increasing temperatures may increase productivity. And this is probably in common to the Finland case study. We do not face problems with freezing as much in winter, although there can be some events. So I think this part of the case study is similar. But this is not the total truth for whole Austria, due to this diversity in the alpine areas or the Alps in the middle, which have some kind of climate segregation. Good to know that others have problems.
My question goes again to adaptation and the question of prices. So if we can expect in this region a positive impact on productivity, how much of it could you gain more from adaptations, and how much could you release more if you assume that prices would go up, or how much would be blocked if you assume that prices would go down?
So, if I understood correctly, the question was on the production potentials in the region and the results from adaptation. What we observed from other studies in Austria is that the adaptation efforts do not yield as much with respect to yield gains. There are some improvements, let's say, in the values up to plus 5% or so in our models, so probably that's underestimates adaptation gains. I think in this region there are productivity gains still to be achieved, and there are discussions among farmers and administration and so on increases. Austria has a large-scale agri-environmental program which reduced productivity growth in the past, I guess, and there are farmers which think about going away from this agri-environmental programs, increasing production. And I think this is also challenging to the Austrian agri-environmental programs and policies.
Kamal Wishi from ABS. My question is, I have just a question. First one, how this model is calibrated, the farm model, how it is calibrated. And the second one, when we link the biophysical model to the farm model, how did you check, for example, the input, the quantity of input that we use in the crop modeling, when we aggregate the farm level, it fits with what you observe in the farm level. This link between the crop and the farm, how can you check that this is well done?
Thank you for this question. With respect to the calibration, farmer space do not use calibration techniques, so it's not no PMP behind it. The reason for it probably is that it is already challenging to establish the model with respect to solution time. So we have another ASMA model which uses calibration, and we are thinking about integrating it here as well to see how the results change. Instead of calibration, we make use of historical observations as much as we can with respect, for example, to crop rotations, livestock mixes, or livestock constraints on the farms. And this is very challenging, I think, also for adaptation studies, because those limit, of course, as in all models, the adaptation range and necessarily underestimate adaptation. With respect to the link between the crop model and the trait model, there are basically two options. One would be to integrate crop model outputs on the basis of relative changes, that is percentage changes based on the scenarios. In this certain case, we cannot apply this one because we do not know enough about single field level yields. So in the case of farmer space, we're making this run for each individual field, and each crop crop rotation combination, we integrate absolute values which are validated by base validation and discussions with stakeholders and experts. But there is no specific method so far set.
Thank you very much. No, I have problems with there. Yeah. Thank you very much. We'll go now to the next talk. to southern Europe, also another geophysical area, but also with climate change problems, and Giacomo will present a Islamic case study.
Thank you very much. I hope you are not sleeping. So this is the job made by a large interdisciplinary team. Most of the people are here in the room, and in case there will be hope to speak if you have specific questions. So the work is framed in this question, which is the meta question for the regional pilots of Macsur. What will be the different contributions of different European adaptation strategies to ensure global food security until 2050 at different scales, while keeping the greenhouse gases targets? So how we interpret this? First of all, we chose a case study, and why just in the Olistanese area, which is in Sardinia. This is mostly because we already have in this area many projects going on. Above all, AgroScenari, which is a national project on climate change adaptation. And so there was already an interdisciplinary team at work there, and context data were available from other projects. Secondly, because it's a very diversified agricultural district in a Mediterranean context, so we find there cropping systems from rice to dairy systems to horticulture or pastures. And thirdly, because in that area we have activities running from agriculture to agri-food industry, producers organization, and a lot of the food that you are eating in this day comes from the area. So it is in the center of Sardinia. What you see here on the left is the area served by, included in the Olistanese Water User Association, and the colored area within is the actually irrigable area which is served by irrigation. Actually, only 30% of the available water and the available irrigable land is irrigated in this area. This is one of the issues. While the rain-fed areas are some 18,000 acres. So, as you see, most of the rain-fed area is represented by forage crops, pastures, and hay crops, 80% overall, which are feeding the dairy sheep Sardinian system in this area, the dairy sheep system. While in the irrigated area, we have a district, the district of Arborea, which is a dairy district with some 30,000 cattle in some 6,000 hectares, a very high stocking rate, and producing a lot of irrigated forage crops, silage maize, and other forage crops. Then we have some rice, 80% of the irrigated area, and some vegetables, particularly artichokes. So the first step of this analysis was to identify 13 farming system typologies. And this was done according to a set of indicators, from statistical indicators to data obtained by the Water Use Association and by the network of economic data. I don't remember it's the RICA network in Italy, and there's another name at the European level, however you know the counting. So what emerges from this subdivision is that within the irrigated area, we have most of the surface is occupied by these mixed farming systems made of vegetables, mainly artichokes, but also tomatoes, carrots, and potatoes, and cereals like rice, which are integrated with vegetables, or cereal forage farming system. This in terms of hectares, so in terms of land area. In terms of rain-fed crop, it is the sheep system which is the most important. If we go see in terms of economic value, we see that 82% of the economic value, the net income which is produced by this area, is related to irrigated cropping systems, and mainly to the dairy cattle system, which actually lives from the import of many feeds from abroad. and also from this mixed farming system in which rice has an important role. The rain-fed area in terms of net income is not so relevant, but it is very relevant in terms of social and economic social values, I would say. This is the classification according to the seamless categories, and we can see that in terms of farm size, we are in the medium type in the rain-fed area and large farm size in the irrigated area. And as farm intensity, we are in the middle. But from pictures, maybe you get a better figure. You can see here the livestock system of Arbolea, the dairy sheep system, which is based on grazing, all year round outside, mostly without stables, the rice system, and the Sardinian artichoke, which you will taste tonight. So this is a sort of diagram showing the process that we followed to analyze this pilot study. Let's start with the climate section. We produced the CNR EPMET, and Massimiliano Passo is here, produced the scenarios for the near future. So we focused on changes in the near future, which are the most important for our policymakers. So 2020, 2030, using this technique. I don't want to go into detailing techniques, but what we produced from this art is 150 years of present climate and future climate, EC and FC, based on the local weather data set in this area. So the output of this was used, is summarized here. And you can see an increase in temperature during, for instance, July of plus 1.5, plus 1.7, the minimum and maximum temperature. An overall rainfall decrease of just 6%, but what is most important is a decrease 33% in March, April, and May, which is very relevant, particularly for the rain-fed system. If we see the net evapotranspiration, which is the potential evapotranspiration minus the precipitations, we can also see that in terms of potential, which is irrigated land, we see a deficit which is up to 200 millimeters per month in July, and a surplus in the tails of this diagram, which is in the winter, when we have all the rainfall which overcomes the precipitation. But if we see the net evapotranspirations of the rain-fed area, we can observe that we have a deficit in March, and then the crop dies in May, June, and we have no deficit in the summer. There's no rain but no crops in the rain-fed area, so they don't suffer any deficit in the summer. And we have a surplus in the winter, which recharges the water table. So it's quite interesting to observe that the two systems are completely different and differently vulnerable to climate change. The blue line here is the present climate, the red line is the future climate. This means that we will have an increase in demand of water for irrigation in the near future. While the rain-fed system, we don't see any difference, but this is masked. It's a sort of noise, because in fact, in the future climate, we will have less rain in the spring, and also less crop development, and then less evapotranspiration. So this is compensated, but at the end, you will see we will have less production. So this kind of data were the input for the crop modeling. We use in this case EPIC and also DSAT, using local cropping system data sets from experiments or also from farm recordings, and using the local weather data set. And much of the information that we input to the EPIC model was from processes of interaction with farmers. and also through participatory field experiments. And the outcomes of the EPIC model were of this type. We have frequency distributions in the 150 years of present and future climate. For instance, for rainfed grassland, you can see in the present climate, this is the frequency distribution. In the future climate, both with high or low CO2, doesn't matter, they have decreased in production from 1.1 tons per hectare to 0.9 tons per hectare, and a slight increase in variability as well. And the same happens for the rainfed hay crops, which is the fundamental resource for the dairy sheep system, because they stock in this way, they stock hay for the winter and for the autumn. In the irrigated system, if we see the irrigated hay crop, which is irrigated in the spring, we have an increase in production due to climate change. That's because we have higher temperatures in winter, and this gives advantages, particularly under high CO2 in terms of production. For the silage maize is a different thing, because if we just consider the current hybrids, we will have a decrease from 22 to 20.5 tons per hectare dry matter of the silage maize. But if we change variety and we use a longer cycle, then we can compensate. So we can have here just an example of the response of cropping systems to expected climate change in this area. This kind of data were the input in the modeling chain to the economic data through this passage, which is crucial. We transform this using at least in probability distribution fitting of the performance in terms of yield or evapotranspiration under present and future climate. And this was an example. For instance, this is the case of net evapotranspiration. The blue curve, the blue distribution is the current climate. And we see we divide it into 3 states of nature, which is 50% the middle situation, 25% low net evapotranspiration, and which means cooler climate, cooler years, and on the right we have 25% in the blue line of hot climate and then high state of nature of evapotranspiration. In the future climate, we expect a shift in increasing net evapotranspiration in the area, in the irrigated land, which means that the bad years will be not more than 25% of the years, but almost 50% of the years. And the same we did for instance, the hay yield from rain-fed crops. And you can see here that because of the drought that we expect to have in the spring, we have a reduction of the average, but also a shift of the distribution. So the bad years will not be anymore 25%, but they will be 60% almost of the years. Again, for the heat waves, for the dairy cattle, for instance, they suffer a lot from high temperature, and we will see that this is on the x-axis, we have the temperature humidity index, and we expect a shift of the PHI during May, September, so in the summer. That means that while in the current situation only less than half of the years will be critical for the dairy cattle, in the future we expect almost 80% of the year critical in terms of heat waves in the summer. So this was the input, the probability distribution we used as input for the calibrated 3 stages discrete statistic programming model, very complicated name, but this is an important step because the economists were able in this way to simulate the choices of farmers using the probability distribution of the current climate, which is a representation of the experience of the farmers and their perception of vulnerability and of uncertainty for the future. So we ran this model, which was calibrated using local farming system data sets, also from the participatory process. And this way we could simulate what how farmers could respond to these shifts in climate. And this is the kind of data that we obtained for the 13 farm typologies. What we see here is that the most vulnerable farming systems in the area, in the irrigated area, are those based on animals. Well, citrus is also a problem, but it's not so relevant in the area. So the cattle, they will lose almost 6% of the net income in the near future. And this is dramatic for them. And this is also mostly because of the shift in temperature and humidity index. In terms of dairy farms, the shift is even more dramatic. There are three typologies here, and it's related to the higher cost of feeds because of the lower production of hay. So at the end, in the whole pilot area, what we expect is that the shift in climate will reduce 6.5% the net income of the whole area. So how we use this data? This information were an input for interactions with policymakers, with farmers, with organizations to let emerge policy options and recommendations. We used them in several workshops with farmers, with regional officers, people from the ministry. Marina will recognize Macsur here in this meeting in Cagliari last June. And this was, for us, very important to understand what kind of knowledge is needed by this kind of people to make the political choices. So, what is underlying in all this process is that we are developing a process which is based on the social learning between researchers, between the interdisciplinary team. It took about 2.5 years to understand from me and Gabriele what we are talking about, and also with farmers and local stakeholders. So unfortunately, this one is not perfect, but how do we classify the different kind of responses that we could implement in this kind of situation? This is taken from an English paper, which is quite interesting. We can make different responses to climate change for adapting farming system to climate change, from no response to the best response possible. And you see here a red line which divides what is the kind of responses that we call compliant or just efficient management to the kind of response which is strategic, which is towards the win-win adaptation strategies. So an example of level 2 compliant response is just to involve people, just to invest on insurances, for instance, or extend access to land. An example of level 3 efficient management response is just to change variety or increase farm size. What is more strategic that we found in the dialogue with stakeholders is to finalize what is the participatory process to beyond formal requirements of, for instance, the Water Framework Directive. Let's go beyond that. Design new learning spaces around monitoring and data. Involve, for instance, payment officers in the design of rural development plan calls and so on. Invest in patient scale action. And the most important, the most strategic response that was suggested by our stakeholders was to link complementary districts to increase resilience. We will talk a little bit more at least in the stakeholder learning session later on. But just for you to know that these responses here and these strategies were the results of the combination of modeling and stakeholder interaction. So this is the last slide, and I hope not to be too long. These are the emerging issues of this job. So what kind of changes are we facing? What is the nature of the issues and the changes that we are facing? What kind of praxis do we have to change to designing effective research processes? At what scale, what level, what kind of knowledge? Is it just scientific knowledge that we need, or we also need the knowledge of the farmers or the policymakers? And who is worth to involve and how? So these are the questions that we will be discussing in the next session. Thank you very much.
Who wants to ask a question? Here, go.
Thank you for this presentation. From the beginning of your presentation, I saw that there are a lot of farmers in Sardinia that they do not irrigate. Some of them they irrigate, and the ones that they irrigate, they have a larger profit, as we saw from your first presentation. But what about the impact of climate change on the changing of the irrigation need? I was expecting to see any figure where irrigation, at least from the volumetric irrigation need, to appear in any of these slides. So I don't know if you can tell me about that.
Well, yes, there's not probably a picture for that, a graph for that, but there is an increase. Of course, we expect an increase in irrigation needs. Actually, there was also a slide that I cut for to be shorter, but there is an increase in needs both in spring and during the summer. What I said at the beginning is that, unfortunately, in Sardinia we have a lot of water in the dams, which is not used. We throw it in during the winter, it's thrown in the sea. Because we only irrigate 30% of the land that is irrigable. But actually, it's not the limiting factor in terms of amount of water. And this is a portion on one side. Even if you think that maybe we paid for using this water and it's unused. However, there is an increase. We expect an increase in crop transpiration and then in crop requirements at all levels, also for the rainfall crop.
But you get required microphone. Final question.
You showed some results about the possible impacts of climate change on different farm types. And in the breaks, we also see the movies about how farmers perceive present climate change already. Do these results match with their expectation, with their impression of ongoing climate change? Is there any?
Well, despite what we saw in the spots, actually 90% of the farms perceive that climate is changing. And there are quite a lot of consistencies between farmers of what kind of changes are going on. However, we've also found that the variables, the indicators that they use to show what is changing is different when you compare different kind of farmers. So for the rice farmers, it's completely different than from shepherds. They use different indicators. They don't know about temperature, rainfall, millimeters. They use other indicators, they use meat production or the percentage of diseases and things like that. So actually there is another kind of knowledge, but this kind of empirical knowledge that the farmers have is the one driving their choices. And it's completely different from what we use as knowledge for influencing policy.
Yes, I can understand that. But you also gave indication of what possible income losses, for instance, not? I remember 5 to 6% for some numbers. Is there are there such trends already visible now for these types of farms?
Yeah, absolutely. Did you see from the first presentation that there's a lot of land abandonment in the rainfed area of Sardinia? That is related to the abandonment of the leadership system in Sardinia, related also to these kind of problems. Not just to that, of course, because there are other social problems around that. And also in Arborea, you will hear the day after tomorrow that many farms are closing because they are borderline. Some of the typologies that Gabriele was able to distinguish through economic indicators are more at risk than others. And the temperature humidity index, which is the heat stress. I'm sure that the farmers will talk to you about that in the day after tomorrow, because they lose some 25% of the milk production in July and August compared to the winter period. And this is just in a period in which Sardinia has double population because of the tourists. So it's a big damage for them. So they perceive a lot this kind of problem.
Thank you. We'll break now into parallel sessions. And the first one will be the stakeholder learning session, where we as scientists want to enter a dialogue with the institutional stakeholders. And this one will take place in Aula Consigliare, with upstairs, just above us.
Yeah.
There is the session on uncertainty. How do we scientists deal with uncertainty in our models? This takes place here in Aula Macsur. And we have a session on integrated tools, which takes place in Aula 2, which is upstairs, straight across the staircase. And we reconvene at 6:15 or 15 minutes later. And with the speed session, I ask again the people who present in the speed session to upload their presentations here to the computer, so we have them ready.
Let's hear about our stakeholders.
And another stakeholder presentation.
Honestly, it's not clear. I mean, we are talking about priority of things that they are the effect of climate change.
Mi piacerebbe vedere quale vorrebbe un clima canalico.
Questi fondi dovrebbero attenderci con una frequenza superiore a quello che è stato fino adesso.
Spero che cambi in meglio.
La sua comprensione sono legati all'aumento delle temperature che rappresentano un incremento delle superfici idriche, insomma. Comincia a pesare un periodo siccitoso lungo nel tempo, sì, lì bisognerà mettere una tecnica a disposizione del agricolo.
Un ciclo che si ripete.